In today's video, we're breaking down Isaiah Bond of Texas. What are his strengths and weaknesses? How is he best deployed at the NFL level? Where do we think he goes in the NFL draft? And what do we think we end up getting out of him in fantasy? Watch to the end of this video and you'll have a good idea. In terms of his size and weight, he's listed as 5'11", 180 pounds, which is similar to that of Jalen Waddle, who is 5'10", 183. I think both the height and the weight are accurate here. In terms of his age, he is an early declare, which positively correlates to success at the NFL level, specifically for wide receivers. And he's only 20 years and 8 months old, meaning he will be only 21 for the entirety of his rookie season. Now, you might look at his production and say, well, he hasn't really done anything. And while the counting stats aren't that great, remember that context is important. Instead of just looking at some counting stats and saying, oh, he's never had more than 671 yards, this guy sucks. No. He's had to deal with the quarterback play of Jalen Milroe and Quinn Ewers. They're not exactly known and they're not the best passers of the football. And so while, once again, the counting stats here aren't that impressive, film looks a lot better for him. In terms of his production, though, it is limited. On 28 targets in his true freshman season at Alabama, he had 17 receptions, 220 receiving yards, and 1 touchdown. He did step it up in a big way in terms of, at least comparatively to his freshman season as a sophomore. And so he went from 28 to 75 targets, 17 to 49 receptions, 220 to 671 receiving yards, 12.9 to 13.7 yards per reception, and 1 to 4 receiving touchdowns. Then he transferred to Texas, and unfortunately, Quinn Ewers did hamper his production quite a bit. And so he went from 75 targets down to 56, 49 receptions down to 34, 671 receiving yards down to 540, but he did go from 4 to 5 touchdowns and upped his yards per reception from 13.7 to 15.9. And so it isn't the best analytical profile in terms of, progressive growth, but to add some context, I don't really think it's fair to him here due to his quarterback play. Looking at some advanced stats here, among draft-eligible FBS wide receivers with at least 40 targets, that was a sample size of 168 players here, Bond ran 303 routes, which was 95% of the team routes. In terms of his deployment, he's generally a boundary receiver, but he does see enough slot work where he should be versatile at the NFL level. And so in terms of slot percentage, he was 22.6%, and out wide snap percentage, 76.8%. His yards per out run of 1.78 were tied for 102nd in the sample size. Once again, the offense really wasn't the best. His quarterback play really wasn't very good, but on film, I saw tons of separation. In terms of his PFF receiving grade, his 70.3 was 88th in the sample size. I think that he's a lot better than his PFF receiving grade indicates, but I don't think that his play per se was top tier elite by any stretch of the imagination. In terms of his yak per reception, his 8.0 are 12th in the sample size. He is incredibly dangerous. He has elite speed and acceleration and varies the acceleration to maximize angles. In terms of his missed tackles forced, his 7 are tied for 87th. He isn't per se the best make you miss guy in the sense of juking you, but once again, he uses acceleration and deceleration to his advantage and is very dangerous after the catch. In terms of his contested catch percentage, this is one of the weaknesses of his game. His 27.3% isn't very impressive. He was 3 out of 11 this season. And he really just doesn't have the build to really be able to dominate people at the catch point. In terms of his targets and targets per game, 56 isn't particularly great, and that's 4.0 per game. His receptions and receptions per game of 34 and 2.4 per game aren't great either. His 540 yards and yards per game of 38.6 aren't incredible. And his touchdowns and touchdowns per game of 5 and 0.4 per game aren't particularly great either. But once again, to contextualize it, he received pretty horrific quarterback play. In terms of his ability to beat man and zone specifically, as well as his utilization and ability in the slot and on screens, his PFF grade versus man of 60.2 was 170th, and his yards per out run versus man of 0.85 was tied for 191st. I do think that he's a little bit better against zone than man coverage, but he still has the elite separation ability to separate regardless as to whether it's man or zone coverage. His PFF grade versus zone of 71.2 was tied for 66th, and his 2.09 yards per out run versus zone was 72nd. Well, he has no issue finding the soft spots in zone. He separates quite well. I'll explain some of his better routes in a little bit when I get into the grading, but I think that he is a little bit better against zone than man, but I really think that he's much better than some of these PFF grades indicate. In terms of his PFF grade on screens, his 89.7 was 20th in the nation. He is very good at following his blockers, using acceleration and deceleration to his advantage, using the leverage of the blocks to his advantage as well. His PFF grade in the slot of 69.0 is 88th. I think that he's going to be effective in the slot as a Z and as an X, contingent on the coverage in which he's facing on the outside. But I would agree that he's, not necessarily the best slot receiver in this class per se, but I don't think he's the 88th best slot receiver either. In terms of his first downs caught, his 26 are tied for 87th, but once again, quarterback play matters. As far as grades go, he's give or take 5'11", 180 pounds. That's similar to the build of Jalen Waddle, who is 5'10", 183. He's a true junior out of Texas, so he is an early declare. My valuation, I think he's worthy of a late first and early second round pick. My comp, he's a Tyreek Hill / Jalen Waddle type of player. And so he resembles Tyreek Hill in his truly elite speed and acceleration, as well as his ability to vary his acceleration to his advantage. But he doesn't per se have quite the agility and change of direction that Tyreek Hill possesses. Tyreek Hill is a truly rare player that we may never see again. But he also reminds me of Jalen Waddle in his ability to separate horizontally, and he has very good ability on his double moves to separate. He ran an insane double move against Michigan that created probably 5+ yards of separation. It's incredible. In terms of his short route running, I gave him a 4 out of 5. He runs a very good shallow cross and a speed out and separates with insane ability on those routes. His snap down on hitches is pretty good, but it isn't perfect. And so I gave him a 4 out of 5, which is a great score there. In terms of his medium route running, I gave him a 3.5 out of 5. And so I do think he's above average. He looks really good on dig routes, but he didn't run a ton of intermediate routes in the film in which I watched. And so I do want to see a little bit more out of him at the NFL level there. But in terms of his deep route running, his ability to stack on go routes deep down the field is truly special. Once again, the speed and acceleration is very, very impressive, and it does resemble that, in my opinion, of Tyreek Hill. In terms of his double move against Michigan, he had a nasty stutter go where, once again, I think he had probably 5+ yards of separation, and he is going to be able to run out and ups, sluggos. There's going to be no issue there. In terms of his releases, his release package is quite good against off coverage. I do worry, though, that with his frame that he does have the potential to get bullied against physical press man coverage. But the thing is, if you try to press him and you're not successful, you are screwed. He will score a long touchdown on you. And so he is, in my opinion, going to be able to somewhat leverage that aspect of his game to his advantage against physical press man coverage. But based on, I've seen him get bullied in terms of at the catch point. And so I really don't think he has the overt play strength to really be able to physically beat press man coverage. So I do think that's a potential worry at the NFL level. But once again, in general, his release package is quite good. In terms of his speed, I gave him a straight 10 out of 10. It really wouldn't shock me if he scores in the high 4.2s in terms of his 40-yard dash time. You see him separate and stack easily on vertical routes down the field and horizontally. In terms of his acceleration, it's also incredible, 10 out of 10. Once he gets the ball in his hands especially, he can just turn it on and instantly gain a ridiculous amount of speed. But more so even than just his overt ability to gain acceleration quickly, he can vary it to manipulate angles to his advantage. It's impressive. In terms of his deceleration, I gave him a 4 out of 5. It's also quite good. I have seen a little bit better, but he does use it manipulatively to gain advantageous angles, shatter angles. It really works well with his yards after catch. It is going to allow him to extend and create maximum yardage after the catch. In terms of his agility and change of direction, when he isn't running full speed, it's great. It's near elite in my opinion. But when he does get to some of these higher speeds on the field, I don't see his change of direction and agility being quite as good. And so it's, once again, contextual in terms of what you're talking about with the agility and change of direction. I don't think when he's running full speed that he's really going to be able to have incredible jump cuts per se. But in terms of his route running, he can snap down instantly. His speed out is quite good. He achieves a sharp angle and comes back to the football. And so I think both his agility and change direction are both above average. In terms of his catching and at the catch point, I gave him a 3 out of 5 on catching. On 159 targets, he had 6 career drops, and I did see some on film. His hands aren't a weakness. I think they're above average, but they aren't per se incredible. In terms of his contested catch rate, he has a career average of 31.6 in terms of his career contested catch rate. That really isn't very good. He does get moved off of his spot. But the one good thing is he is so dangerous and such a good separator that he isn't going to find himself in these types of situations as much as some of these other guys that just aren't blessed with this game-breaking speed and acceleration. And so once again, I don't think it's going to affect him as much because it's not going to happen as much for him. But at the catch point, it is one of his weaker areas. In terms of his run after catch, I gave him a 5 out of 5. I don't think he's really going to be breaking tackles with physicality per se. He's not really the biggest guy. But in terms of shattering angles with manipulative acceleration and deceleration and just overt speed, he is going to take a lot of passes that most receivers aren't going to be able to the crib. In terms of his dog factor, straight 5 out of 5. He is fearless over the middle of the field. While once again, he isn't the most physical guy because his frame doesn't allow that to happen. It's not for any lack of desire or willingness on his part. He is a very dog-like player. In terms of his analytics, once again, he never had 700 receiving yards in a season or more than 5 receiving touchdowns. And so he does get a 4 out of 10 here. But once again, to contextualize it, he had Jalen Milroe and Quinn Ewers. Those kinds of quarterbacks, and more so their play, isn't really conducive to success for their receivers. And so it isn't per se his fault, but the stats really are the stats here. But I do like that he's an early declare. In terms of his projected draft capital, probably a late first. I think that could potentially move up if he has a really good combine or pro day showing. NFL teams really love these really high-end speed guys and especially accelerators as well. And he does have the ability consistently to take the top off of defenses. And in terms of his XC and slot ability, I gave him a 4.5 out of 5. I think that he's going to be able to be deployed everywhere on the field, but I do think against physical press man coverage that he is going to be able to be bullied. But once again, his answer to that is, if you miss, I will house this on you. And so that is something he's going to have to his advantage. Overall, it's not really a worry. I think he will be able to be deployed outside on the line of scrimmage. And once again, with my worries and limitations, he did have limited production. Once again, contextualizing that, his quarterback play was subpar, and he's not the best at the catch point, which is just going to happen with somebody like him with, being around 5'11", 180 pounds. If he was really dominant at the catch point, this guy would just about be unstoppable, honestly. And he's going to find a lot of success at the NFL level because there aren't going to be that many players that are going to be able to hang with him, especially in man coverage. And so where does Bond rank among his contemporaries in the 25 class, as well as the 2024 class stacked on top of each other? Well, I gave him an 80.5 grade once again, and that is in the good tier of receiving prospects. And so he's tiered with the likes of A.D. Mitchell, Ladd McConkey, Emeka Egbuka. I definitely think he's a much lower prospect than Neighbors or Hunter. I don't think he's nearly the prospect of MHJ, McMillan, Odunze, BTJ, Royals, or Burden either. But he definitely has his strengths. Once again, I just don't think he's necessarily going to be the most dominant at the catch point, especially in contested catch situations. And I don't think that he's going to be the best at beating physical press man coverage. And so that is a ding to his profile, as well as his lack of a production profile. But once again, while I'm not going to give somebody who didn't produce an elite score in terms of analytics, it is important once again to contextualize that quarterback play really hurt him there, and ultimately probably was the biggest difference here between him being potentially at the top of this tier or potentially even the bottom of the next great tier of receivers. Remember that he's give or take 5'11", 180 pounds. That's roughly equivalent to the build of Jalen Waddle, who was 5'10", 183. He's a true junior out of Texas, and so we do like that he's an early declare. My valuation, once again, is that he's worthy of a late first and early second round pick. He's probably going to be a late first, I'd imagine. My comp, he's a Tyreek Hill / Jalen Waddle type of player, and so he's Tyreek Hill in that he has truly elite speed and acceleration, and when I say elite, it is elite. And he reminds me of Jalen Waddle in his ability to separate horizontally and really sell his double moves. And so I gave him once again an 80.5 out of 100, which is a good receiving prospect. And I want to give a special shout out to my Patreon members. Thank you to Big Hunt, SP, Major Jack, and Infamy MTG. If you would like to become a member, I'm going to leave a link in the comment section. As far as what you'll gain, you'll get access to a private Discord server. I'm going to have a real life and fantasy football chat where we talk about real life NFL news. Any questions you might have will be answered in the real life NFL chat. And as far as the fantasy football chat, we'll talk about what's happening in the fantasy world. I'll give you team reviews, give you optimal roster construction based on your specific league settings, trades you can make to strengthen your roster, buying and selling points, specifically price points for various players based on your positions of need. I'll give you a special shout out, obviously, on all of these videos. You'll get early access to videos. You'll be part of private live streams that are not available to regular YouTube members. And you will also have the ability to suggest videos specifically for you on Patreon. I've already made one on Isaac Rendo as per request by one of my Patreon members. And so once again, if you would like to join, the link is going to be in the comment section. Thanks.